When was the last time you stayed silent, when everything inside you screamed to speak?
Picture it, a moment where the words clawed at your throat, begging to break free, but you swallowed them whole. Maybe it was a boss barking orders you knew were wrong, a friend pushing you too far, a stranger's sneer you let slide. Why didn't you act? Why did you let the moment pass, let the chance to stand tall slip away? You've felt it, haven't you? That shiver down your spine, that tightening in your chest, that quiet surrender to fear? Let's face it, most of us are cowards, and the question burning here is simple. Are you one of them? Here's the harsh, unfiltered truth. People aren't cowards because they lack muscle or grit. They're cowards because they're terrified of losing something. Comfort, approval, the paycheck that keeps the lights on, the smile from someone they need to like them. It's not about facing lions or storms. It's about facing the mirror and admitting you'd rather bend than break. You see it everywhere, in the way people nod at nonsense, shuffle along in lines they hate, keep their heads down when they should be raising hell. And you've done it too. You've traded your voice for safety, your spine for a soft landing. It's not pretty, but it's real. Take John. He was 38, a mid-level accountant with a decent salary and a corner desk. For years, he took the hits, the snide remarks from his manager, the extra work dumped on him, the way his ideas were stolen without a blink. He'd grit his teeth, mutter under his breath, but never push back. Why? Because the job paid the bills, because rocking the boat might mean starting over, because being liked mattered more than being right. Day after day he shrank, until one afternoon he overheard his boss laugh about him to a colleague. John will never fight back, he's too scared. That cut deeper than the rest. He still didn't quit, didn't confront. He just kept going, a ghost in his own life. Sound familiar? Could that be you? I'm talking to you, reader. Right now, wherever you are, I see you. You know this feeling, don't you? That gnawing ache when fear clamps down on your courage and leaves you mute. You've stood at the edge of defiance and stepped back, haven't you? Maybe it was yesterday, maybe it's happening as you read this. A moment where you could have said no, could have stood up, but didn't. You're not alone. Most people live this way, bowing to shadows they've built into giants. But knowing that doesn't make it easier. It doesn't quiet the storm inside, the clash between who you are and who you let yourself be. You feel it tearing at you, a war you're losing not to them, but to yourself. This isn't just about embarrassment or petty slights. It's about something raw, something primal. Cowardice isn't loud. It's a whisper that creeps in, telling you to stay small, stay safe, stay silent. And you listen because the alternative feels like a cliff, steep, jagged, unknown. John listened for years, trading his dignity for a paycheck, until he barely recognized the man in the glass. But here's where the fire flickers. You don't have to stay there. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of turning that whisper into a roar. The truth stings. Most people are cowards because they choose it, because fear's grip is tighter than their will. But you're not most people, are you? You're reading this, feeling that pull, that restless spark that says you're more. So what's it costing you? Every time you bow your head, every time you bite your tongue, you're not just avoiding trouble, you're burying yourself. The dreams you don't chase, the lines you don't draw, the life you don't claim, they're drowning in that silence. John's story isn't over, but it's a warning. Cowardice isn't survival, it's surrender. You feel the weight, the churn, the quiet rage of a soul begging to break free. This is your wake-up call, reader. The truth about cowardice is ugly, but it's yours to face. Are you afraid? Good. That's where it starts. Now what will you do with it? Most people are not even aware that their submission is a choice. Erich Fromm, A Mind That Dissected the Human Soul, dropped that truth like a stone into still water, and the ripples reach you now. Think about it. Every nod, every step in line, every quiet yes when your gut screamed no. You chose that. Or did you? Maybe you didn't choose at all. Maybe you just drifted, caught in a current you never questioned. Why do you bow when you want to rise? Why do you march when you want to halt? Blind obedience isn't a chain you see. It's a cage you feel, and most of us live inside it without even knowing the door's unlocked. This is the philosophy that cuts to the bone. Cowardice isn't just fear. It's a habit, a reflex of surrender dressed up as survival. You obey not because you agree, but because standing out feels like stepping into a storm. From Saw It, the way we cling to the crowd, the rules, the scripts handed down by voices we don't dare challenge. It's easier, isn't it? Easier to follow than to think, to blend than to break free. But here's the brutal truth staring you down. You're not living, you're performing. You're a puppet on strings you didn't tie, dancing to a tune you didn't pick, all because questioning it might cost you something. A seat at the table, a nod of approval, a scrap of safety. Imagine a world of marionettes, millions of them, heads bobbing, feet shuffling, mouths moving in unison. No one leads, no one stops, no one dares to cut the threads. That's not a dystopia, that's your Monday morning. The boss says jump, and you ask how high. The crowd moves left, and you follow, even if right feels truer. Society whispers, this is how it's done. And you nod, even when it chokes you. It's a grand, silent play, and you're in the chorus, not because you're forced, but because you're afraid to step off stage. From called it a choice, but it's a coward's choice, the kind that trades your soul for a shadow of peace. Why do you do it? Why do you let the world pull your levers? It's not laziness, it's fear, pure and simple, draped in excuses. You obey because the alternative means eyes on you, whispers behind you, the risk of being alone. You've felt it, that shiver when you think of disagreeing, of saying no, of walking your own path. The trap is invisible but ironclad. Obey and you're safe, resist and you're exposed. So you keep your head down, your voice low, your will buried. You're not just following orders, you're following a script written by everyone but you. And the worst part, you don't even see the ink drying on your life. This is where the drama rises, where the air thickens with stakes. Picture it, a sea of blank faces, hands folded, eyes averted, all marching to a drumbeat they hate but won't silence. That's the trap of blind obedience. It's a slow death by agreement, a life where you're less a person and more a piece. Fromm didn't just diagnose it, he dared us to defy it. But most won't. Most will stay tethered, not because they're chained, but because they're comfortable. They'll live entire lives never knowing who they could have been, all for the soft lie of belonging. You've seen them, the ones who shrug and say that's just how it is, as if it isn't a prison they built brick by brick. So where do you stand? Are you one of them, nodding along, letting the strings pull you through another day? Or do you feel it, that tremor deep inside, that restless pulse telling you this isn't your stage? The trap's real, reader, and it's tight around your ankles. You're not forced to obey, you choose it, every time you bite your tongue, every time you follow the herd instead of your heart. Fromm's words aren't a judgment, they're a mirror. Look into it. See the cage. See the door. It's not locked, it never was. The world's a machine, grinding out cowards by the million, but you don't have to be its fuel. Question it. Cut the strings. Step out, or stay blind, and let obedience bury you alive. Let me tell you about Maria. She was 42, a daughter of immigrants, raised in a family where tradition was law. For years, she followed the script: marry young, stay quiet, serve others, even when it suffocated her. Her mother's voice rang in her ears. Don't shame us. Don't stand out. So she didn't. She took the jabs from her husband, the guilt trips from her parents, the weight of a life she never chose. She wanted to leave, to paint, to breathe, but fear held her like a vice. What would they say? Who would she be without their approval? By the time she turned 40, she barely knew herself. One day, she found an old sketchbook, her teenage dreams in faded pencil, and wept. Fear had stolen her. Does that sound like you? Here's the cruel, unblinking truth. Cowardice isn't the absence of courage. It's a choice to pick safety over freedom, and you make it every damn day. It's not that you can't fight, it's that you won't. You give up not because the battle's lost, but because you're too scared to start it. You'd rather live in a cage you know than face the wild unknown outside. Maria did it for decades, trading her soul for a nod from people who'd never truly see her. And you're doing it too. Every time you bow to expectation, every time you let fear gag the voice clawing to break free. You're not surviving, you're surrendering. Look at yourself, reader. Right here, right now, I'm calling you out. Face your fear. What's it taken from you today? A chance to speak? A dream you shelved? A no you didn't say? I see you, hunched under the weight of it, pretending it's fine when it's eating you alive. How many times have you backed down, smiled through the sting, let them win because fighting felt too big? You're not weak, you're afraid, and that's worse. Weakness might break you, but fear keeps you broken, a prisoner in a cell you locked yourself. Why do you give up? Why do you hand them your power on a silver platter? There's a science to this, a cold machinery in your mind. Psychologists point to social pressure, that ancient itch to belong, wired into us from days when exile meant death. The herd says jump, and your brain screams, do it or they'll leave you. Add the instinct to survive, avoid pain, seek comfort, and you've got a recipe for obedience. Fear isn't just a feeling, it's a puppeteer, pulling strings you don't even see. Maria didn't stay because she loved her life. She stayed because the tribe's approval was her oxygen. You don't speak up because the spotlight burns, because rejection stings, because safety feels like a warm blanket. But it's not a blanket, it's a shroud. This is where it cuts deep, where the air turns heavy. You hear it, don't you? That rustle, that faint drowning sound. It's your dreams sinking in the swamp of your silence. Maria heard it too, flipping through that sketchbook, tears falling on pages she'd abandoned. Every yes she gave when she meant no was a nail in her coffin, every nod a brick in her wall. You're building one too, aren't you? Brick by brick, with every flinch, every dodge, every moment you choose fear over fire. It's not their fault, it's yours. You give up because it's easier, because the fight feels like falling, because you'd rather be liked than alive. But that rustle? It's getting louder, begging you to listen. The psychology of fear is a beast, but it's not unbeatable. Maria felt it, trapped for years, until that sketchbook broke her open. She didn't leave overnight, but she started, small steps, a painting here, a boundary there, until the fear shrank and she grew. You can too. You're not doomed to give up, you're just used to it. But habits break, reader. The cost of cowardice is your life, slipping away while you bow. Why keep paying it? Why keep handing fear the reins? You're still here, still fighting inside, still capable of ripping that shroud off. Face it, feel it, fight it. Maria did, and she's breathing again. Your turn's now. What will you let fear take next, or will you finally say enough? What if one act of defiance could snap the chains worn so long they've become invisible? Imagine it, a single moment where the word no breaks free, where the script handed down is torn apart. What if that's all it takes to wake up from a sleepwalk of obedience? The question lingers like smoke, curling around the edges of a life dulled by fear. Blind obedience has kept the world turning, a machine oiled by cowardice, but there's a spark in the dark. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the fire that burns through it. Most stay cowards because they never try. What happens when that changes? The philosophy cuts deep and unyielding. Living means facing the void, not hiding from it. Obedience is a shield, flimsy and false, guarding against the chaos of freedom. But safety isn't life, it's a stall, a slow fade into nothing. Albert Camus, grappling with the absurd, saw the path. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. This isn't about grand heroics, it's about waking up, eyes open, fear trembling in the background. Cowardice bends the will to the world's drumbeat, courage rewrites the rhythm. How long can the march of submission go unchallenged? Fear has ruled the stage, a puppeteer pulling strings with ruthless precision. It whispers of failure, of isolation, of loss, and the crowd listens, heads bowed, steps in sync. But what if the strings were cut? What if the whisper met a shout? The world thrives on those who kneel, who trade their fire for a flicker of calm. It's a transaction, silent and sinister. Obey, and the storm stays distant. Resist, and it crashes in. Yet the storm isn't the enemy, it's the forge. Courage isn't born in stillness. It's hammered out in the clash, shaped by the choice to move when every instinct screams stop. Defiance isn't easy, it's raw, jagged, alive. This is where the air thickens, where the ground trembles with stakes unseen. Blind obedience paints a picture of order, neat lines, quiet voices, a machine humming smoothly. But it's a lie, a canvas stretched over a void. The obedient don't live, they drift, shadows of what might have been, tethered by a fear they called duty. Camus didn't just see the trap, he dared a rebellion, not with fists, but with existence itself. Most don't dare. Most cling to the cage, its bars familiar, its walls a comfort they mistake for home. They'll fade there, not because they must, but because they won't leap. What shifts when that leap is taken? The drama rises like a tide, relentless and roaring. Picture a world where every nod, every yes, every lowered gaze is a brick in a prison built by choice. Fear isn't just a feeling, it's an architect, designing lives of quiet surrender. But it's not invincible. One crack, a question, a refusal, a step off the path, and the walls shudder. Courage doesn't erase the fear. It stares it down, walks through it, leaves it gasping. The obedient march on, eyes half closed, but there's another way, a life that rebels by breathing, by choosing, by burning bright against the dark. It's not painless, not pretty, but it's real. Here lies the crossroads, stark and unforgiving. Stay asleep or wake up. Fear will claw, will beg, will promise peace if the head stays bowed. But peace at that price is a grave, a slow burial under layers of should and must. Camus dared to live, to defy the absurd with every step. The obedient don't defy, they dissolve, lost in a sea of sameness, their fire snuffed by their own hands. Courage is the way out, the flame that lights the exit. It's there, waiting, a challenge etched in the silence. Keep drifting or rise. The world hums its lullaby of submission, but the awake hear a different song, one of rebellion, of life, of freedom, which will echo louder. The horizon splits open, a jagged wound of light against the dark, and there you stand, teetering, trembling, alive. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when the stars align now. This is the hour where cowardice dies or claims you forever. The world spins on, a grinding wheel of blind yes and bowed heads, but you're not its axle anymore. You've heard the hum too long, the drone of obedience, the chorus of don't rock the boat, the soft thud of a million footsteps marching nowhere. It's deafening, isn't it? A lullaby for the spineless, a dirge for the dreams they buried. But your ears are ringing with something else now, a sharper note, a call that cuts through the haze. Look back, see the trail of moments where fear won. The nods you didn't mean, the silences you wore like armor, the chances you let slip because the shadows loomed too large. That's the majority's legacy, a life half-lived, a grave dug by their own hands, filled with what-ifs they never answered. They're still out there, shuffling through days, eyes down, voices muted, trading freedom for the lie of safety. It's a brutal arithmetic. Fear plus time equals nothing. They'll fade, not with a bang, but with a whimper, and the world won't blink. That's the truth of cowardice. It's not loud, it's not bold, it's a quiet theft of everything you could be. But you're not them. Not anymore. The air tastes different today, sharp, electric, heavy with the weight of what's possible. You've felt the cage, the invisible bars of expectation and dread, pressing in until your ribs ached. You've smelled the rot of your own surrender, haven't you? Every time you bent, every time you followed, every time you chose the herd over the howl inside. It stinks of regret, of a life handed over to ghosts who don't care. Yet here you are, heart pounding, blood rushing, a storm brewing in your veins. This isn't their story now, it's yours, and it begins with a single, shattering choice. Enough. That's the word. Let it echo, let it crack the sky. Enough of the kneeling, enough of the whispers, enough of the chains you forged with every flinch. The majority will stay down. They'll clutch their fears like treasures, polish their excuses like gold, and die clutching them still. Their wills are weaker than their worries, and that's their epitaph. But you're a spark in the ash, a blade in the fog, a voice that won't be hushed. The psychology of obedience is a machine, grinding out cowards by design. Fear of loss, fear of shame, fear of the unknown. It's built to break you, so break it instead. Rise. Not later, now. Lift your head, unclench your fists, let the fire you've banked roar free. The world doesn't need another echo, it needs a thunderclap. You've been a shadow too long, fading into their rhythm, dissolving in their rules. But shadows don't last when the light hits, and you're the light now. Step forward through the fear, through the noise, through the trembling that says stop. It's there, clawing at you, begging you to stay small. Let it claw, let it scream. You're bigger than it, stronger than it, alive in a way it can't touch. One move, one breath, one defiant stand. That's all it takes to rewrite the math. This is your challenge, your line in the dust, your war cry against the tide. No more drifting, no more bowing, no more letting fear wear your face. The obedient will sleep through their lives, but you're awake, raw, ragged, real. The horizon's bleeding light, and it's yours to claim. Leave the cowardice behind, a shed skin they can keep. Most won't make it, they'll stay tethered, trapped, too scared to leap. Not you. You're the outlier, the rebel, the one who lives. So live, loudly, fiercely, fully. Let the world feel your weight, hear your voice, know your name. No more cowardice, only you unbroken, unbowed, free.